Welcome to Coast with DLA Piper Employment, where we talk about current events, trends, and hot topics in the employment law space. I'm your host, Sherelle Glim from our New York employment team, and we are joined today by Michaela Bernardo, an employment lawyer in our Dallas office. Michaela, today we're talking about an important issue that remains at the forefront of employers' minds: mental health issues in the workplace. With May being Mental Health Awareness Month, we want to highlight key issues for employers to consider. So talk to me about the trends you are seeing on this issue.
Thank you, Sherelle. So we're definitely seeing in this post-COVID landscape, with all the economic uncertainty, employees are having more mental health issues arise, and clients are calling us with questions about how to deal with these mental health concerns that their employees are bringing to their attention. We're also seeing an increase in litigation and as well as federal agency enforcement action and initiatives related to the mental health space.
So what, as you're receiving these calls, what are some specific considerations that employers should keep in mind as they navigate mental health issues in the workplace?
So we suggest one of the first and most important things that employers do is that they create a culture of wellness and inclusion. We encourage clients to have their supervisors regularly reach out and engage with their employees, that they model a culture of wellness, and that they make sure their employees know what resources are available to them to address mental health issues. And then we also recommend that the company fosters an environment of inclusion and diversity. We also encourage clients to make sure they have experienced human resources professionals available to make sure that they're addressing employee concerns in a compliant and consistent manner. And then we also make sure that, we encourage employers to have their supervisors and managers trained as well on these types of issues so that they know when they need to engage or bring in an HR professional to address a concern.
Understood. Are you seeing an increase in accommodation requests?
Yes, we are seeing an increase in employee requests for accommodations related to mental health issues. And as I mentioned before, we're also seeing increased litigation on that topic. Right. So it's really important for employers to ensure that they have a policy in place so that employees know how to make an accommodation request and also who to ask if they have a question about that process. It's also important for employers to make sure supervisors are aware of how to spot an accommodation request. It's very typical for employees to use language that may not include the word disability or accommodation.
Right.
But even if they raise any kind of concern about a work challenge that's related to a medical condition, that may trigger the company's obligation to engage in the interactive process under the ADA. And basically, generally, under the Americans with Disabilities Act, an employer has a duty to provide an employee with a reasonable accommodation as long as that does not cause an undue burden to the employer. And so employer really needs to be thoughtful and creative and considerate when they are working through the interactive process with employees to make sure that, or to evaluate whether or not the request is reasonable. And also, with respect to the interactive process, the company should always ensure that communication with the employee is prompt, effective, and that it's documented.
What about confidentiality concerns? How should employers approach their obligation to maintain certain information as confidential?
That's a great question. When you're dealing with employee mental health issues, it's a really private topic. Sure. And so employers should be sensitive and mindful to an employee's desire to keep that information confidential. The basic rule is that any medical information that's learned about an employee must be kept confidential. This can include information that's not a medical diagnosis. It can even include information such as that an employee requested accommodation. However, the employer may be able to let a supervisor know if an employee needs to be off work for a few days, or if an employee has certain duty restrictions upon a return to work. And then finally, companies should just be mindful of the medical inquiry rule under the ADA and be aware that they shouldn't be asking employees if they have a disability, because that is not permitted. And these are really just a few considerations that we wanted to highlight for you guys. There's obviously so many more that we could talk about. This is a really tricky issue, and there's many different laws and considerations for employers related to these types of claims.
Absolutely. And I'm sure we have just scratched the surface on the intricacies and the complexities of this topic. Thank you so much for walking us through the key considerations for employers. And for those of you watching, if you have any questions or for additional information on what we've discussed, please reach out to your DLA Piper contact. And we hope that you will join us for our next episode of Coast to Coast with DLA Piper Employment. Thank you very much for joining us.